Welcome to DLT Virtual Training Session 2 from State Support Team Region 8. This is Christine Farrell and Janelle Schuler, and this is part 2 of our two-part series on leading the district leadership team. Let's take a look at our learning intentions for this session. During this session, we will clarify the purpose and the work of the DLT, learn about the problem-solving approach that the DLT could utilize, and consider how the district leadership team could conduct work, whether virtually, traditionally, or using a hybrid approach. In our previous webinar, DLT Virtual Training Session 1, we talked about the first 3 steps in the Ohio improvement process. Step 1, identify critical needs. Step 2, research and select evidence-based strategies. And step 3, plan for implementation. In this webinar, we will continue talking about the improvement process, beginning with step 4, implement and monitor, and explore step 5, examine, reflect, and adjust. If you missed the first webinar in the series, it is located on our SST8 YouTube channel. So now it's time to take a look at step 4, implement and monitor. Implementation requires focusing on changes in adult behaviors and practices. Implementation should be the main focus of the district leadership team, building leadership team, community school team, and teacher-based teams. Monitoring is collaborative learning through observing implementation of adult practices and their impact on student outcomes. Measuring and monitoring student performance is something that many of you have done frequently in the past. The new focus is measuring and monitoring the adult implementation and its impact on student performance. Adult actions directly impact the changes in student performance, from identifying the critical needs, to selecting the right evidence-based strategy, to planning on how to implement with your students, to now how to monitor fidelity of implementation. As a DLT, how will you monitor the implementation of the adult practices or your cause data and its impact on student learning, the effect data? Monitoring the impact of the adult practices on student learning may be new to your DLT. How will you monitor the effectiveness of those adult practices? These may be considerations that your district needs to examine, with an additional consideration may be, how will you do this in a virtual environment? As you are implementing and monitoring, here are a few questions for your DLT to consider. What will we implement and monitor at the district level? How will we monitor adult and student indicators to measure progress of selected strategies? Are certain practices more effective with specific subgroups of students? Are all DLT members clear on what, how, and when we will implement? Are there any virtual considerations? Is everyone clear on what, how, and when we will monitor? What are the virtual considerations? Some additional planning questions to consider for implementing and monitoring. If the practice or strategy is having a positive impact, how will we replicate the effective practice or strategy throughout the district? If the practice or strategy is not having the intended impact, what corrections are needed? Let's consider monitoring and some potential action steps for the DLT. Does your DLT review the monitoring data from your BLTs on their TBTs? If the answer is not yet, how will you plan to do so going forward? Are there any considerations or concerns that need to be addressed within a virtual environment? How does your DLT act on this data? If the answer is we haven't yet, how will your team plan to act on it in the future? What are your next steps? And based on your monitoring data, describe one action your DLT has taken to support BLTs. If the answer is, we haven't yet, what one action do you want to take now to support your BLTs? At this time, pause the webinar and discuss these questions. Let's revisit the scenario we began in our first session. To examine the identified district need of comprehension, the DLT decided to focus on 3 evidence-based strategies throughout the district. The DLT selected reciprocal teaching with an effect size of 0.74, class discussion with an effect size of 0.82, and note-taking with an effect size of 0.59. The DLT would support BLTs by providing an overview of these selected strategies, and at the end of the first quarter, the DLT would discuss and examine the impact of the strategies selected by analyzing common assessment data from each building. So now let's take a look at step 4. To measure plan implementation by analyzing adult actions and the impact on student performance, during the September District Leadership Team meeting, the DLT will review feedback from District Improvement Day mini PD sessions and determine specific district-level next steps to be implemented and/or specific BLT next steps. DLT members will report out at their September BLT meeting, and BLTs will report back to the DLT in October. To monitor adult practices and analyze student performance to determine if additional district and/or building support such as coaching, professional learning, and/or resources are needed, buildings will use the Look For document created by DLT members. Administrators will conduct walkthroughs looking for evidence-based strategy implementation on reciprocal teaching, note-taking, and/or classroom discussion, and share the findings with the BLT. BLT members will bring walkthrough data to the October DLT meeting. And to provide feedback and support to the BLTs, after examining BLT walkthrough data, the DLT will identify trends in areas of reinforcement and/or refinement that need to be addressed and determine immediate course corrections.
The last step is step 5, examine, reflect, and adjust. Having the ability as a team to answer the questions of what is working and why, and what is not working and why, is profoundly important to the team's ability to make sustainable progress. The defining difference is whether the adults take personal responsibility for student learning and then make intentional changes based upon the needs, strategies, plan, and implementation. In your district or community school, is this happening? If so, when? Do the adults clearly see the connection between their actions and student performance? Now it's time for the DLT to examine, reflect, and make adjustments. The 3 overarching questions include, where did we start? Where are we now? Where do we go next? Let's dive a little deeper into the questions that your team will explore. Thorough implementation occurs when the set of actions and strategies are implemented as designed with accuracy and consistency. When examining implementation, consider the following questions. Are strategies being implemented as intended? Are critical actions or tasks missing? Are all the buildings consistently implementing the action steps? As you reflect and adjust, consider the following questions. Was the implementation fully, partially, or not successful? Has the strategy had enough time or support for implementation to have an impact? Are the actions occurring as planned? For example, are timelines being met and are resources available and in use? Was the strategy the correct strategy to reach the goal? What can the organization do moving forward to ensure intended implementation? At this time, you may wish to pause the webinar to discuss these questions with your team. So let's head back to the scenario. Let's consider this question. How can we improve student performance? Where did we start? After examining district-wide data, the DLT has identified the need to improve comprehension levels throughout the district. Where are we now? The district common assessment data shows a 25% improvement in the area of comprehension, with higher levels of improvement at 36% noted in the intermediate building. Where do we go next? The next step is the DLT has decided to continue the focus of implementing evidence-based strategies to improve comprehension. Let's consider this question. How will we continue to support implementation? Where did we start? The DLT provided PD sessions on reciprocal teaching, class discussion, and note-taking. Look-fors were developed for administrators to collect the walkthrough data. Where are we now? The DLT will set increased walkthrough goals for December through February. The instructional coaches will provide support to specific grade levels for December through February. Where do we go next? We'll share walkthrough data at the January DLT meeting, and the BLT will follow up on the impact of the instructional coaches' support. Are there any critical tasks or actions that are missing? Where did we start? This question is not applicable. Where are we now? Minimal walkthrough data did not give a true picture if the evidence-based strategies were having the expected impact. Where do we go next? We'll provide monthly walkthrough goals and share out data at each of our DLT meetings. What adjustments, if any, need to be made? Where did we start? This question, again, is not applicable. Where are we now? We're still in the beginning stages of walkthroughs with limited number of walkthroughs completed at this time. Where do we go next? Increase the number of walkthroughs and begin voluntary peer observations to examine the clarity of the strategies. You may be wondering, how long should it take to go through one improvement cycle? There is no specified time frame for how many meetings it should take to work through the 5 steps, or how long each cycle should last, as BLTs and TBTs are working through this process as well. The answer is, it depends on your needs. If the district is looking at a rapid cycle approach to implementing a virtual learning strategy or practice to measure the impact on student performance, you certainly don't want to wait until half of the year is over to determine that the practice wasn't effective. So let's consider 2 questions. What do you need to do to ensure that your DLT is successful? And what are the next action steps you need to take as a DLT? At this time, pause the webinar and discuss these questions with your DLT members. Let's close with a thought about effective leadership. Effective leaders believe decision-making is shared across teams, empowering all staff to contribute to purposeful decision-making and resource management. Continuous improvement is everyone's responsibility in the school community. In reflecting upon the DLT webinars, will the actions of your DLT change? How will you ensure and communicate that continuous improvement is everyone's responsibility? So finally, let's check in on our learning intentions for this session. We clarified the purpose and the work of the DLT. We learned about the problem-solving approach that the DLT could utilize, and we considered how the DLT could conduct work, whether that be virtually, traditionally, or utilizing a hybrid approach. Thank you for joining us for the DLT Virtual Training Session 2. At SST8, our middle name is support. We're here to support you and your district. To find out about our many offerings and opportunities, follow us on Twitter at OhioSST8 or check out our website at www.sst8.org.